On this video, we're going to look at how we create an illustration. The problem that you were shown in number 3 had an illustration already for you. Well, down here for problem 4, they give you only words, and you have to try to create an illustration from the words you're given. So it says, let's suppose someone put a yardstick in the ground so that it stood up vertically. And this yardstick cast a shadow of 30 inches. So you're trying to draw an illustration, because it asks you, draw an illustration of this yardstick and its shadow. So much like this situation, we're going to draw an illustration of a yardstick with a shadow. So the yardstick is in the ground and it's vertical. So you can say this represents the yardstick. And once again, we have a sun, and the yardstick is going to cast a shadow. So it says in our problem, the yardstick is standing vertically and it casts a shadow of 30 inches. So the illustration is simply one that looks like this, 30 inches. Here's your yardstick and here's your shadow. Now, the next piece says draw a triangle that can be inferred. So this situation can also look like a triangle. We've already looked at making triangles from illustrations. So now if you're making a triangle, you would say this line represents the yardstick, this line represents the shadow, and this line represents closing the triangle. So you can create a triangle, by putting an imaginary line that casts down to the end of the shadow. So, and then you would put in your corresponding measurements for each of the pieces of the triangle that correspond to the pieces of the illustration. Now here's the interesting part. You're just told this is a yardstick. So how do you know what this is? And if you look, that is part of the question. It says, what is the height of the triangle in feet and then in inches? And I'm telling you here, do not solve with proportion. You can't. This is one triangle, one situation, one triangle, as opposed to the earlier problem where you had two situations that created two triangles. So a tree and a pole. This is only a yardstick and a shadow. But what I'm trying to get you to see in this problem is, how do you figure out this height if it's a yardstick? So what you have to figure out is, what are all the things that you know about a yardstick? For those students who may not have started out learning this conventional American system of measurement, in other words, you weren't familiar with yards, you weren't told about that as a child because you may have grown up in another country, you might have to Google and look at what is a yardstick. And it will tell you how many yards a yardstick is, and that's something you're going to have to know, and I'm not going to tell you. How many yards in a yardstick? How many feet are in a yardstick? And then how many inches are in a yardstick? That's how you would give a number to the height. And that becomes important because in this last problem, you're asked now to put a sunflower near the yardstick. So once you draw a sunflower with a certain height and a certain shadow next to the yardstick, then you're going to have two triangles. And I'm not going to solve this last problem. This problem you should be able to do on your own. You will draw an illustration of the sunflower and its shadow. You're going to draw an illustration of the yardstick and its shadow. And then you're going to draw two triangles that represent this scenario. So you're going to draw a triangle that shows the illustration of the sunflower and the shadow, and a triangle that shows the illustration of the yardstick and a shadow. And you're going to label the sides of the triangle like this. You will label. Once you figure out how tall a yardstick is, you will have this measurement. Then, in that last problem, you're going to write a proportion, and you're going to find the length of the sunflower shadow. One thing I did not, I've only gone over it once, where when you have proportions with different measurements, I gave a video of that problem here. Number 2, you have a smaller triangle and the larger triangle, and I put units on the problem. There's a video for that. With that information, when you're going to go from inches to feet or feet to inches, you should also be able to answer the last part of this problem with the tree and the pole, because you're going to go from meters to kilometers or kilometers to meters, you decide. And in problem 5, this probably is hard to follow, but problem 5, since you're given a yardstick and you're going to decide whether you're going to use yards, feet, or inches for the height of the yardstick, and you have to think about what's the easiest to use if you're given that the sunflower is 4 feet 2 inches high. So it's a little bit of a challenge to think about how to do this last problem here. All right, I hope that makes sense.